So I'm calling this engaging nature soulful permaculture. So, we're in great danger, and it's our own fault. Is there any way to get rid of this little bar at the bottom? There it is. Okay. And we have to do something about it. And basically, fundamentally, we are out of sync with nature, and that is unsustainable for any species. I won't read all this, but we get too little sleep. We awaken by alarm clocks. We jumpstart ourselves with caffeine and sugar. We work indoors under steady levels of electric light all day and into the evening, and then we have difficulty sleeping. So we may become tired, depressed, or anxious, and our sleep may be disturbed. Digestion and metabolism can be thrown off, and we generally become more valuable. None of these are good things. Bill Morrison said, I always thought this was the best thing, is permaculture is a philosophy of working with rather than against nature. So what is nature? So nature is everything. And that's my view. That you can go look that up in Wikipedia, and there will be a lot of arguments that no, nature is not everything. It's only plants and animals, except for humans, which aren't really nature. That kind of stuff. But this is nature at a universal scale. This is the biggest picture we have, and it's a simulation from computer data, real data of the universe. And if you imagine that all the bright spaces in it, the little spots, are entire galaxies, okay, and sometimes super galaxies, clusters of galaxies. And so the scale of this thing is just off the charts. But there's this filament thing going on all the time. It's vast beyond comprehension. And like I say, all of this light is clusters and clusters of galaxies of stars and star systems and planets and so forth by the billions. And basically it's all light that's blasting through space, and the light, this gets complicated, this is quantum mechanics stuff, but the light is creating the universe basically. Instructions flying through. And this is just an interesting picture that shows the synapses and so forth in the brain on the left and the universe on the right. It's the same structure. We see it over and over and over again, including underground with funguses and so on. And just to get, if you want to see more about this concept, I've got a website at, what happened to the thing, davidcrossley.org. And it's a story that is all about this particular aspect of what we're talking about here. So it's not huge. It's about 50 pages, and they're all short like this. So you might have a look. And so all that stuff flying around, which is all energy, is occasionally being slowed down for whatever reason. And the reason is just mind-boggling. But when it gets slowed down, or the wave collapses, as they say, it becomes a particle or a particle-like thing, which becomes part of an atom, which becomes part of a, etc., molecule, and so on, up to the biggest things there are. And so it's not very real, this universe. And it's all these loosely bound things flying around at high speed, and it's very ephemeral and tentative. Everything is very ephemeral and tentative. When you get people like Tesla who can begin to understand this stuff, it says if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, which is to say, think in terms of nothing. Einstein said, concerning matter, we have been all wrong. What we have called matter is energy, whose vibration has been so lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. And he referred to all this stuff as spooky action, and he didn't like it. And never got comfortable with the notion that the universe actually doesn't even exist. In fact, people like Schopenhauer, way back before quantum mechanics was even thought about, did this long essay, wrote a book about it called Will and Something, in which he said, the world is my idea. I'm thinking this up. I'm dreaming this universe into existence. And now we've got people like Jim Carrey saying, just going around openly saying, look, I know I've been studying this stuff and I've been getting all the vibes and I've been doing meditation. And I guess I have to tell you that I don't exist and neither do you. So these voices are just challenging everything we believe. And I will say that I can understand this, having read a lot about it. I can understand this sort of intellectually, but absolutely cannot get it viscerally. So what are we talking about here? This kind of stuff where quantum mechanics shatters our personal individual conception of reality. When you turn from one room to the next, when your animal senses no longer perceive the sounds of the dishwasher, the ticking clock, or the smell of chicken roasting, the kitchen and all its seemingly discrete bits dissolve into nothingness or into waves of probability. So quantum weirdness is called. And one of its great scientists said this: if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. So what you have to get is that no one can actually see how this works so far, but it's been measured and tested over and over again. And unless there's some observer seeing something, that something doesn't exist. Okay? So we get Schrodinger saying quantum physics thus reveals a basic oneness of the universe, which is all this stuff about consciousness flying everywhere. We get it, we're starting to get into that. So if all this universe is a single continuity, that is to say, all of what you see as black space here is endless, seamless, completely without any borders or edges. And we've got scientists trying to say now consciousness is literally what we and the whole world are. The leading edge of science across many fields of research and all scales of existence is coming to that same perspective of the nature of reality. So we get these kinds of, if you go search on Google for something like cosmic consciousness, and then select images, they'll all be like this. I mean, artists are having a horrible time trying to figure out how to make this, how to show you what this looks like. In fact, that one little thing I had about a wave turning into a particle, which is not at all what is helpful, I think, in sort of thinking what it looks like, is about the best thing I've ever seen. People just can't, so far, illustrate this stuff. But I should have said that the quote that's so heavy is that consciousness is the vehicle in which the universe is becoming aware of itself. Interesting. It's everywhere, including your brain. And of course, we have thought for a long time that it was coming out of our brains, which seems not to be the case. It's just everywhere, including like our brain. And so there's a question about whether humans are actually instruments of invention. Some scientists say, yes, that's beginning to look like that is the case. So are we one with the universe? And of course, the answer would be yes, and that our job is to experience life on behalf of what? So it's interesting that this is how people try to get more information. You know, all of it everywhere, flying through space, is available to everybody, and just sitting gives you access. It's not easy, however. Permaculture does the same thing. You know, you're supposed to sit in a chair or something, or just pay close attention, just study what's going on, and it will save you a lot of work when you're in your garden. So the other big question is, are human beings animals? In all the Abrahamic religions, which is to say Christianity and Islam and Judaism, the answer is no. Humans are not animals. Humans were created by God to look just like him, however you deal with women on that level, it's hard to say, but and maybe he, you know, is kind of better looking than we are, but that's, humans are not animals in most religions. And if you just look up food web, you never see humans, you never see people in it. It's like they don't exist. But I mean, who is eating all this stuff? You know, humans are omnivores. They will eat almost anything, crickets and so forth. So when scientists show us the flow of energy from plants through all the animals as they eat each other, they don't show us human beings. Now, if you look up humans in the food web, you'll get humans in some of the pictures like this. In evolution, on the other hand, we are clearly animals. We're way over here on the right, where this is, and way along the path of evolution, you know, very high up in this chain of thing. A lot of this, if you think about half the species, we've lost half the species since 1970. Of course, half of this stuff has been extinct for a very long time. But anyway, so there we are over there after gorillas and chimpanzees, where the humans are very recently evolved in the animal kingdom. So I'm just going to say we're animals from now on. We started out as animals that lived in families, you know, and we were just grazing on whatever there was. We would eat berries and nuts and so forth, and other animals. You have to throw this in. We are all from one place. There's only one family, and there are no races. We all come from Africa, and every one of us is descended from one woman who lived about 200,000 to 580,000 years ago, and from one male from about 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. Language emerged around 60,000. So a long period of human time, there was no language. And so what were we thinking? You know, it's hard to focus on what we could be thinking when there's no words and there's no language. I'm sure there was lots of grunting and there was understanding of stories and so forth, but they were locked away from each other. So this is going to be this is pretty controversial, but this is wild enough to want to know. So we followed, when we came down out of the trees and started following across the savannah, we followed these herds of ungulates around, with grass eaters with multiple stomachs. And they would, their scat would produce mushrooms. And since we were highly observant hunter-gatherers, and we would test anything, and we would try a little bit of mushroom. And one thing that comes out of this psilocybin mushroom is heightened visual acuity. You can see a little better at distances. And so that would have been great if you were a hunter-gatherer, right? So they would eat a little more. So here is Terence McKenna's, and you should read this stuff because it is quite amazing. But his theory is that early humans who came down out of the trees followed these herds around and ate the ungulates and the mushrooms. And as they ate more of them, there was a suddenness, I guess, where language just appeared, and McKenna thinks it appeared visually in front of people somehow. And from then on, we were able to talk. So we see this all through. You see cave paintings with mushrooms on them, and this wonderful book called Sapiens by Yuval Harari. And by the way, I would say wonderful book, and then say his next book, where he tried to be a philosopher, is not so wonderful, but this one is terrific if you want to know where Sapiens came from. And he said the real difference between us and chimpanzees is the mythical glue that binds together large numbers of individuals, families, and groups. That glue has made us the masters of creation. We are very social beings, and with language, we were able to make up stories and create some systems and myths and rules. And some people took more advantage of that than others, and history evolved. And humans began to grow plants at some point, and that meant They had to stay in place and stop wandering all over the world. They had to stay there waiting for the seeds to grow, which meant building things. And so, and it also meant making other things and then finding ways to find other people you could trade with. So, you know, if you had a, whatever, this guy's selling wooden objects here and somebody's got a sheep they want to trade for a wooden object, that you make a deal, and these little spots are kind of important, and people would come together in these places, and there would be trading centers that appeared on roadways, the Silk Road being a real famous one. And then villages started to appear, and religion came with that. This place, Göbekli Tepe, is one of the oldest ones that they found traces of 12,000 years ago, and it appears not to have any kind of government thing or any kind of hierarchical places where rich people would live and poor people would live in worse places and so forth. It was all about the religion, it seems. So who knows where that was all going. And somewhere in there, Gilgamesh appeared, and that's the oldest written documents we have about that are about religion. He was a king, of course, and once he appeared, then of course the dams broke and lots of kings appeared, and we had this sort of god diversity where there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of different gods and all kinds of different people, and nobody believed in the same thing anywhere on earth. It was just chaos of religion. And people built like termites. It was amazing. We are ferocious builders of habitat and infrastructure. We can do things like this, you know, just think about any other animal. It's just inconceivable how something like this gets built. We can leave the earth. We've had people on the moon. We've got people since November 2000 living in space in this space station, which is going to plunge into the sea in 2030, by the way. Space travel is almost a thing. You know, these 4 people were not astronauts that went up on SpaceX a few months ago. And this guy, the guy third from the right, paid their tickets. And so it's an industry that's beginning to come so that anybody can go into space with a lot of money. Elon Musk sent a Tesla to Mars on his one of his rockets. So, you know, it looks like the ability of humans to imagine things into existence just seems to be completely unlimited. And so you have to ask if that's a problem. When we say that Earth has lost half its wildlife since 1970, I mean, that's 50 years. You know, how can that have happened? And why would we do that? We're eating into our natural capital. We're damaging, we change the dynamics of the Earth's climate. And there are many scientists who think human extinction is coming in this century. So it's better not to go extinct, given that it's possible our role is larger than we imagine it is in the universe. But what does that require of us to not go extinct? Well, we have to think our way out of this. So what do we need to know? Well, I think this is as far as I want to think, and that's really far. I don't understand anything that's going on in this picture, except there seem to be some sort of electromagnetic fields, and the sun is fiery, you know, monster over there. But we need to know more about that, and so we just live on this little blue sphere that might be the only place there is life. We have no evidence that there is life anywhere else. And the Earth, this is the Earth cut in half, is this itself a sort of fireball, very hot, except at the very little thin edge, like the peel of an apple, where all of life lives in what we call the biosphere, like just a little skin. And this is kind of amazing how thick that is the distance from downtown to the energy core. 12 miles. That's it for life. Possibly that's it for life in the whole universe. So we have 4 huge problems. Oh no, we have lots more than 4, I'm sure, but the 4 that I stick to are climate change, species extinction, pandemics, and war. I won't talk about war, but we all know what that means, that the suddenness of a nuclear something, would be interesting, wouldn't it? So first we have to understand, and I'm sure all of you do understand this already, but the greenhouse effect, which is causing the climate crisis, is just that sun heats up the earth and some amount of that stuff goes back into space so that we don't fry here. And now that we've started filling the sky with carbon and other things, there's too much carbon in there and the heat's not escaping as much. And so it's getting hot on Earth. So there are only 2 strategies here, really. One is to stop burning fossil fuels, and the other one is to pull carbon that's already in the atmosphere out of the atmosphere. So there's no path to livable climate change without pulling a lot of carbon out of the air and putting it back in the ground where it belongs. So what would nature do? This is permaculture, right? Well, nature uses this incredible process called photosynthesis. Light energy hits a leaf, and it pulls carbon dioxide into the leaf, and that goes down into the plant where it makes glucose and sugars, and the water comes up and oxygen goes out, all that, So pretty much all of life is powered by sunlight and carbon moving through plants into soil or water. So we have to protect this process everywhere it exists, which is kind of everywhere, I won't talk about this, you can look at it later, but it's just a pretty good little chart of that kind of thing. So this is basically a carbon sponge. There's a lot of trees from a drone somewhere, which, by the way, drones are really cool, but I'll get into that in a minute. So they pull enormous amounts of carbon out of the air and they push it into the soil. Another way of looking at that. Grass does the same thing, and in many respects, it's actually better. You get grass having out on the prairie that has roots like that, it can pull a lot of carbon into the soil where it gets used as food and so forth. So again, we got to say that plants, remember that plants provide all our food, and that they give us the air that we breathe. And so, they couldn't be more fundamental. So we need all the plants we can get. Here's our region, and here's the trees that are planted all over it. The green stuff and everything else is not trees. If you were down very closer, you would see there's lots of trees in the neighborhoods and so forth. So it's not quite as bad as it looks. But the Houston Galveston Area Council has a wonderful map that allows you to see where you could plant trees. And so they've been pretty much everywhere, including people's front yards and so on. And so trees are these amazing things. They're like pipes between the atmosphere and the earth. So they pull this stuff down, they send it down to these little roots that are just everywhere down there. And now we know, recently have discovered that trees are actually completely connected below the surface by funguses mostly, which attached to the roots. And so they can talk, they're communicating across these networks. This is the biggest plant in the world. This is the pando, which I think is in New Mexico. It's 107 acres of a single root system. That is to say, that is one plant right there, one tree. And these roots feed microbes, they feed the soil. And then these mycorrhizal fungi attach to the roots. So the brown stuff is roots, and these things attach and extend the reach of a tree quite far, actually. I don't know if I've got a bigger picture, but all these little nodules that you're seeing on the root here are nitrogen forming as part of all that process. And that's what's going to feed the plants that you try to grow. I won't talk about this, but you should look at it, because if you're going to do permaculture kind of gardening, you need to understand every bit of this stuff here. It's powerful stuff. So the greatest threat is development of land, especially where it's already growing healthy plants. So the best and cheapest way to avert climate catastrophe is to heal nature by restoring and replanting degraded forests and by better conserving the natural world. So a policy would have to be stop killing plants. And I don't know if there are 3 words more important than that. We need to walk away from these machines and from these places that are where stuff is growing and let it grow. This is a pretty interesting chart, but the top mitigation pathway, natural climate solutions, is reforestation. If you could do it all, I guess they're saying here that would be the equivalent of removing 650 million cars, something like that. So when you see something like this, almost everything you see in that picture is pulling carbon out of the air and putting it in the ground. So we can't let this happen anymore. So let's start with transportation. Most of the problems arise from transportation choice and land choice, but it's the kind of transportation that forces all the land changes. In LA, I mean, sorry, I was ahead of myself. Carbon rising right out of the cars is a pretty significant problem all by itself. Eventually, we hope that electric cars will fix most of this, and even knowing that we will be feeding a lot of those electric cars with power from coal-fired plants, but over time, that can go away too. So this could be solved, but none of the land use problems could be solved. 59% of the land in downtown Los Angeles is for cars, parking lots, and I think the number in Houston is 50%. And so, we're just wasting massive amounts of land and plants just to accommodate cars. Interesting map. The center of this thing is the loop. You maybe can see it there, this right here. Can you see my cursor? Anyway.
Yes.
Okay, good. So that's the loop. And what you're looking at is the carbon footprint per capita, per person, with green the least and red the most. What else do you need to know about sprawl? The people who are living in the middle of any city are much, much less of a problem than the people who live out at the edges and have to put in lots and lots of, have to do both, put in lots of car time and have to have lots of space devoted to cars and have to have other things that are a problem too. So again, we're going to see all the forecasts, official forecasts in Houston are for massive loss of green space of all kinds, prairie forest, marshland, riparian, agricultural land. It's all public policy to destroy this stuff. Official TxDOT policy is intentionally build roads to encourage development of nature. And their excuse is in order to relieve congestion. So this is our early drawing of the Grand Parkway getting started out across the prairie. And if you've noticed all along it, once you leave I-10, which is where it starts, there's nothing out there. There are no people driving out there. In some places, this is a road that didn't even exist at all. So what congestion? And that is always the reason to build these roads or to expand them, is to relieve congestion. One, most of the time, there are no cars there. So it's clearly not about that. And two, it doesn't work. All the scientists who have studied this will tell you that there's no truth to the idea that you can relieve congestion by making bigger roads. It just brings more people in cars and actually gets to be worse over a very short period of time, a couple of years. So this is the Grand Parkway out across this map from Houston Wilderness, which shows the various kinds of wild areas we have, the big thicket, piney woods, all those things. And all the check marks next to them, those are all districts that get touched and harmed by the Grand Parkway. So great, right? This is the farmland back in about, this would be about maybe 15 years ago, right? You'll note the middle is where we have already put Houston. And so that's gone, but that was originally farmland too. But this is the prime farmland that was left a few years ago. This is what is presumed will happen because of the Grand Parkway. So we lose that much farmland, which means farmland is getting further away from us. And so if we're ever going to change how we grow things and grow better things and so forth, they're going to be further away from us than they are now and have to be transported further in order to sell houses. This is just all these little bubbles are towns and cities throughout the region. And Highway 99, the Grand Parkway, goes through one municipality, just one, on purpose. Because the purpose, and now I will say something controversial, but I think is absolutely real. Republicans tend to live in suburbs. That is to say, people who live in suburbs tend to vote for Republicans. And so Republican office holders want there to be more suburbs. And that's what this is all about. And so every one of those little towns and cities is a little bit more likely to have some Democrats in it than the green spaces are. So they don't want this road to go through any of the towns and cities because they don't want to allow any improvements to happen in those towns and cities. They want to keep the quality of life as low as possible. So it's a horrible picture, but there you are. And it's costing us all these plants, of course. Segment E, which was the one that I showed you that little line about, when it was opened, it was maxed out a year later. And now they're talking about widening it, of course. And I'll get to that. This is where segment C will go. It's lower down in Fort Bend County and so forth. And you can maybe see those two little places that say George Ranch Historical Park and George Ranch High School. Well, George Ranch is well, I'll just get to that, but just remember what that place is. And then this is where the road is going to go, right through all the George Ranch land. The George Foundation has all these lofty goals, of course, you know, but they have recently announced that they have plans for a master planned community the size and scope of the woodlands across more than 12,000 acres. It will be anchored at the crossing where this road goes. So they've been lobbying for this road for decades and decades in order to make money for a foundation that clearly doesn't care about climate change or species extinction or biodiversity resilience or flood mitigation or water or air purification, carbon sequestration, soil, you know, just go on, and including the degradation of human physical and mental health. So infrastructure produces, you see this sort of cloud over here on the right, those are all developments, and those are all little curlicue suburban roads. And on the left is the prairie, so far pretty much undeveloped. And what happens, of course, is that these roads begin to make it, when you see that if you want to develop this area up here in the top left of this crossing, then you're going to have another road that goes through the middle of it in order to make it easy. So that's coming. This line up here is Highway Farm to Market Road 529, a 2-lane road that I use. My wife and I come to the farm and we use that road. There's very little traffic on it. You can, I'm sure this has happened to me, drive the length of it from the parkway out to whatever this is, I've forgotten what this is out here, but without seeing a car at all. You might see trucks. Anyway, that is now the next thing. That's the next line on the map. So in fact, all of these red lines and orange lines and yellow lines, these are all lines on a map. These are all places where TxDOT wants to grow these roads. So I don't know why I have that in there, but that's yes. So this road will become a 6-lane highway. Just to compare, this is Manhattan, which has 2 million people in it. And so there will probably, and this rectangle is the approximate development area. The idea is that much land gets developed on each side of a new road eventually. And so what is that, 2 or 3 times as big as Manhattan? And it'll probably have 20,000 people in it eventually. And Manhattan has 2 million. This is what it looks like right now at the Grand Parkway. That's the name of the subdivision out there. And it's actually a little further along than this. The stuff is all plowed up now, and they're putting pipes in the ground and so on. But that's a 1-lane or 2-lane road right there that has that kind of traffic most of the time. So we have to say no at some point. And that's going to be really hard. Here's the kind of power. Okay, this is a huge field up near the Woodlands, big giant forests in 2010. When this line was put on the map, this is the Grand Parkway going through there, and it was decided to put it there and put it there early because Exxon insisted on it, and the governor and everybody else said, okay, whatever you say. So Exxon then plowed it up. And that was back then. They moved the road a little bit, but this is what it actually looks like today. All that forest mostly gone, and I'm sure before too long, it will all be gone. There's another big project. This is the I-45 expansion going through downtown. So you can see where the convention center is up here and so on. But over here on the right in this rectangle, there's a brand new what do you call it, frontage road. That is going to be a 6-lane or 5-lane frontage road, and it will replace 13 blocks of already developed urban property. They will just bulldoze all this stuff, including this relatively new group of condos and apartments called the lofts, which are on a rail line. You see over here on the left, you know, we spent billions of dollars to put that rail line in place, and so that it could support this kind of building and development. And then we're going to tear it down to put a road to widen the road. Well, again, okay, yeah, sorry, I keep forgetting to say no. That is totally about trying to get to this undeveloped road, undeveloped land faster, going out by Huntsville and so on. So that's ready to go, right? We're talking about massive amounts of development to pull people out of the city. So the policy has to be no more transportation expansion, because that's what allows all this land development. So no. So just so you can see, you're looking at Houston over here on the right and Austin over here on the left top, and then San Antonio is a massive area. And all those lines are TxDOT projects. And everywhere there is one of those lines, the development, you can be sure, is underway. People are buying that land and they're ready to go. So, no more development of land. We do not need to develop any more land anywhere on earth. We can live in what we already have developed, and we don't need to ever kill any more plants. So how are we supposed to live, one would ask? Here's Harris County, Houston, Harris County and then some. So this is basically our metropolitan region. It's got 7 million people in it. That's Manhattan. It's got 2 million people in it. If you scale Manhattan up to be big enough to contain 8 million people, it's 10% or 20% of the amount of land that we use. Now, you may say that's too much. Okay, well, here's Chicago. Nowhere near as dense, but still 9.5 million people in this area here, which is again about half the size of our development, which has 7 million people in it. So, if you don't have cars, what do you do? Well, let's look at Manhattan again. 20% of the people in Manhattan have cars and drive to work. 80% do not. Whereas in the United States, the average flips away, and it's 95% that do use cars to get to work and 5% that don't. So somewhere in there, there's a possibility of habitat that doesn't need cars. And just this is a list of Manhattan of population densities. We're way down, but we're the 4th biggest city theoretically. And does it help? Well, this is all gross domestic product. So these spikes are, high spikes are a lot. Los Angeles, New York over here on the right, Houston down here, the woodlands and Sugarland, that's our whole areas. It's not small, but it's not anything like these places. And it doesn't just mean that they have more population in these other places, although it does mean that too. But having a lack of density is not helping get us to, there's no reason for it. So the solution begins with what I just call pedestrian urbanism. That is to say, places where people can live, work, and play, and go to school and so forth, and possibly not need any kind of vehicle at all, where you can just walk around. That's my wife Jody over there with the flowers. This is in Seattle. There are places like this everywhere on Earth, and people love them. And it's all about walking. There's another place, Connecticut, that's massively popular place, and there's no cars. And next up is bikeable urbanism, where you can go further. You have more access to places and experiences if you have a bike. And of course, some people will ride 20 miles a day and to get to places, work and so on. But just to go a few blocks, just to go make your neighborhood appear to be, twice as big, get you access to more places you can go. And some places, like this is, I think it's in Scandinavia somewhere, where it's so common to see things like this. Just amazing. People live with bikes and they get more and more complex and fun. And then the next step up is small neighborhood transit. So these are driverless vehicles that have frequent stops. This could happen on West Time. It'd be easy to do it there. And then next up on the line is what we call transit urbanism, where bus rapid transit operates exactly like light rail. It can go on any street, really, including freeways. And so if you look at one on a freeway, this is like out at West Chase, where you could have this kind of stop where, these buses at certain times of day would be absolutely jammed. Bus rapid transit, it's called. So this is the answer, and the name of it is complete neighborhoods. And some people call it complete communities. But it's a place where you can have a short walk to most of life's daily needs and desires. And it's a place that's pretty diverse as well, and interesting places to live. So complete communities, this is from Imagine Austin, which is their plan. A community is complete when it provides access by foot, bike, transit, and car to jobs, shopping, learning, open space, recreation, and other amenities and services. And what it takes to make this happen is regulations and investment from the public domain. So you're basically saying all the civic uses and all the commercial uses and all the residential uses shouldn't be divided up as they are in suburban areas. They should all be together in what we for centuries have called towns or neighborhoods. So this is downtown or Midtown Houston. This is the post-Midtown property, where these people who walk around there, live there and walk around there, have access to dozens of places they can go to by foot. A few blocks away is the light rail line, where you now have access to thousands and thousands of places, cultural stuff, museums, you name it, everything, sports, grocery stores, all of it. And in this environment, you can pretty much get whatever you want without having a car. So this is the pattern. Forever, we have used this pattern in villages and towns, and as they get urban, you can get pretty dense. This would be a transit station. And so you'd have more and more people living and working right around the transit station. As you move back, you get townhouses and then small houses on their own lots and so forth. That's Brenham in 1873. Well, that's the pattern. That's how you do towns and cities, and it worked for them, right? And it works this kind of like, from the days of trading routes and so on, There would have been a little cluster of stuff in the center that would be on very small pieces of land. And as you get further out from the center, there might be shops and so on. And then bigger pieces of land and fewer people. And then you're out here to into the farmland. So you're not wasting space all over the place. Everything is clustered together so people can walk around it. Then you get two of those places, and so you got to connect them, because maybe this place they make a lot of good bread and they make better cake, and so you got to get back and forth to get this stuff. And they kind of break them down like this. The kinds of urban places or complete neighborhoods are called the city, the town, the village, the hamlet, and they're all surrounded by green areas. And this is a wonderful chart that comes from the central place theory of local and regional economies. Market services is what this is all about, how they develop. This is the area around Stuttgart and Munich and Nuremberg. So the big places, the big cities have these red dots in the center. And as they get smaller and smaller and smaller, you find them out there, just tiny little hamlets and so forth, but all related to some center. That they can get to quite easily. And so you can theoretically, everything around Stuttgart, all these areas here, you get everything. You don't need to go to Nuremberg for anything, theoretically. So that brings us to Ebenezer Howard, who in 1898 published this book called Garden Cities of Tomorrow. He wasn't a planner, he was an economist, but he was worried about how people were living. And he designed this thing he called the Garden City. Now, the shape that he used was only to enable him to hook a whole bunch of them up in a circle, right? But he never intended for it to actually look like that. In fact, I was trying to sell this idea to at the time, the director of Bridgeland out in the prairie here. And they were just going to scatter their houses all over the place. And I said, why can't you do this? Why can't you do a garden city and just put everybody in a place in tight little places together, and then have roads connecting another garden city? You could have a dozen of them out here. I had maps and showed him all that stuff. And his response was that he said, David, I'm not going to build a round Victorian city. She's like, wait, I didn't say it had to be round. I just said these pieces, this is what I think architects call a program. These pieces would be there. So if you look out in the green place, there are some people living out here. There's an agricultural college and children's cottage homes and convalescent homes and stuff like that, fruit farms and so on. And around the edges of the thing are a rail line. And then the next thing in is shops and so forth. I'll go to the next picture. So along over here, we've got cycle works and engineering and a jam factory and so on. And then a grand avenue that goes all the way around it, and then a central park and a garden right in the middle. And right close to the garden would be hospitals, libraries, theaters, concrete wall, whatever that means, concert hall. And so all the sectors would have access to this garden and to all these things easily. There's only 3/4 of a mile from the edge to the middle. Grand Avenue here is 3.3 miles long, and in the middle of it, of course, it's a giant park, but in the middle of it would be churches and schools. So that was his idea, that you would cluster things together, and he built one. So obviously it wasn't a circle. It looks like this. It's called Letchworth Garden City, where you have both. You have nature and farmlands. That's the important part. So around the edges, it was all nature. It stopped, that is to say. It didn't just keep growing. And if you imagine it, it's like Brenham's kind of looks a little the same from the air. It's twice the space, approximately, of Letchworth. But it has only 16,000 people in it, whereas Letchworth has 75,000 people. This is a very efficient way to live. And it's not like Manhattan. It has clear areas of urbanism and then clear areas of what look like suburbs. But if you look at this stuff on Google Earth, you get real close. There are very, very few cars in this town of 75,000 people. looks like this downtown, you know, it's 3 stories. It's not a, you know, like I say, not Manhattan. All over Europe. And, you know, one of the most fun things I do is use Google Earth to wander around Europe and get in close and go away and look at what's happening there. It was developed beautifully, you know. This happens to be Disneyland, just outside of Paris. Walt Disney was a nut about the Garden Cities. And in fact, when he died, they found the book open on his desk, Garden Cities book. So he was going somewhere with that. And he loved the fact that all these little places that were little towns in France were surrounded by farmland and forests and so forth. So he tried to do that with Disneyland as well. So this is something I did a long time ago. This is Houston, what it looks like. Very strange place, but this is what it looks like. So I stuck all these garden cities in it, you know, just to see what that would be all about. And at the time, it would be, I think there were 64, yeah, 64 of these garden cities would fit inside Houston. And you can see there's lots of gray space still left, so there probably could have been 75 or maybe 100. And if it was 64, that would be 2,048,000 people, which is approximately how many people actually lived in Houston at that point. I think we're not far from that right now. And the big difference is that 83% of all the other land in Houston would be rural or natural land. 83%. Now, as it is, it's the opposite. I think something like Houston occupies 83%, and the natural land's about 10 or 15%. So too late to do that, but we did kind of do it. This is how, this is the density of our development right now. This is called activity density, and so the red is very, very dense places downtown and along the loop and other, you know, those whatever those 6 or 8 places that are cities in their own right. They are as big, have as many jobs as Denver. So this is a work in progress that actually has some room to you know, have these places get more dense and have the green spaces get no more development. This is it again. I did this right after, during actually Harvey, when I was trying to figure out where all this was happening. So I wanted a map to show me where all the water is when it was as high as it was during Harvey. And then put in all these clusters of West Chase and Uptown Greenway and all those places, so you could see that there could be a new paradigm here. And so all the spaces that are now, that were blue, are places that could be, for the most part, when it's not raining too hard, could be green spaces. You know, it could be lots and lots of green spaces. We could have lots more. So what does a community need every day? Well, you need food and other necessities. So if you can have a general store and cafe like this, you're a long way from along the road to preventing people just driving off to run errands. And by the way, I remember a guy from TxDOT told me once, the amazing thing about I-10, about the Katy Freeway, is that at rush hour, peak hour, it was something like 70% of all the people are running errands. They're not going home. They're not going to work or going home from work. They're running errands. So some of the errands could be places like this. Where we have our farm near industry, this is what there is downtown. This store, Lindemann, which is, this is wonderful stuff, you know, but where you can get everything almost. And it's true, it's an amazing store, but because it's there, we don't drive to Brenham quite as often. And they have their country ways, right? The sign says, "Hangry? Come by and have a Cease-burger." And I'll bet that was there for a month. Nobody noticed any of those things. And the soul of a complete community is kind of tavernas. You know, I lived in Greece for quite a long time, and really every day more than once. People, everybody in the village would walk to the taverna and get some coffee or get a ouzo or something and hang out and talk to people. So a core detail for this, and I think there's actually a whole business here of corner stores, but to have at least one complete corner where you've got the things you need, and there's maybe a doctor and there's cleaners and so forth, and there's a place to sit, place to eat, and so on. And it could be larger than a corner, but one complete corner, just at these two edges, is massively helpful in the neighborhood. But places where you plan it out like this, where there's big things going on and lots of places for people to live, and there's parks and gardens and greenhouses, and complete neighborhood is something one could build on a block from scratch, and a lot of people are trying it. So the goal is a city with no cars. This is a new place called Cul-de-sac. It's in Tempe, Arizona, and there are no cars allowed there at all. And this has been a huge economic success. And they've started building it. There are a few pictures of it actually in reality, but this is more interesting to get the idea that there's a large place that has no cars and people love it. So I'll quickly go through some things that are happening in Houston that give you hope. Houston now has a Walkable Places initiative. They have a complete communities program. It has 10 communities in it, and all of them have finished their planning and are now starting to work on it. It's going to be hard with some of them, but some of them it'll be like Gulfton is the densest place in Texas, and so it's going to work. We worked with the city some years ago at Houston Tomorrow to develop this map of all the complete communities of various sizes. So, red is very dense places and green is less so, but they're all identified now. You know where to go to do the work. This is a Metro talking about one of their lines or some of their lines, and they use the term complete communities. So it's coming, folks. They use this kind of a map to show how much faster you'll be able to get between Acres Homes and Louetta or Spring and Bush or whatever when the whole new transit system is in place. So nothing gets slower, everything gets faster. And we published this map, which I'm sure led to that map maybe 20 years ago or something, with this trying to sell that very idea. It took a long, long time. And just so you know, I won't talk too much about this, but go back and look at this if you want. This is Houston's original, I don't know if you know that Houston was designed around transit, not around cars. And this is the transit system that was in place up to 1929. Went into the 5th Ward, North Side, out to Bel Air, 3rd, it was all over the place. This is the new plan from Metro for going out farther with these highway-based buses, and so that's the old system is in there. So everything we're talking about is much bigger now. I won't talk about light rail. I mean BRT, other than to say bus rapid transit is essentially light rail on tires, and that's kind of it. It does all the same services, the same capacity and speed and so forth. There's dedicated lanes, level platforms, and so on. This is the first bus rapid transit line we have is this in Uptown, and this is, I guess, on Post Oak Boulevard. Yeah. And I'm sorry, this is the best picture that exists. I can't believe Metro's not really showing you good pictures of this stuff, but I couldn't find anything. So anyway, but the point is, it goes up and down the middle of the road, acts just like light rail, and goes pretty far. Actually, goes all the way up to the to I-10 and to the bus station up there, which lets you get out to all the other communities out west and north. This is like BRT on steroids, where this is in Istanbul. They serve 700,000 people a day down the middle of a highway on Mercedes buses. How about that? And it's just that red line is just showing you how far apart those walls are. And this is Highway this is 59, just going through the Southwest. This is Southwest Freeway, I guess we call it, which actually is a little bit wider, it looks like. And there's no reason you couldn't do exactly the same thing. You'd have to get the cars out of it. But in any event, this could be two-way, except for some TxDOT rules, but it could be two-way. And we'd be seeing things like this. This is a Mercedes autonomous driverless bus. Now it's got a driver in it, but the drivers that are riding around in these buses and trucks today are just there to sort of watch it. They don't touch the wheel, in theory anyway. This is a Mercedes truck where the driver, you can see, is looking at his iPad while he goes along. And, but they, in order to be safe, you'll note that all the other vehicles back here that are hung back are also Mercedes trucks. So they're following this guy and hoping this is the future, you know. Actually, this is the future. I just found this picture. This is amazing. This is the new Volvo trailer. It doesn't even have a cab. There's no point, you know, it just goes on its own as a computer taking it someplace. So this is coming, you know, where we'll have a lane in the freeways that will be for autonomous cars. And really, you know, you could do this in just weeks. You could just paint these things. It's not, you don't have to go through $10 million worth of studies and $100 billion worth of construction or whatever to do this. We probably will do that, but don't have to. So this is coming, and you're going to be in one of your normal car riding along at, you know, 35 miles an hour and watching these guys go by at 75 miles an hour and wondering why you aren't in the autonomous lane. Again, this idea in urban neighborhoods, and that very vehicle is actually operating now on the TSU campus with no driver. And if it works when the test is finished, if it's good enough, I'm sure it will be, they will stretch it out over to the University of Houston campus and actually go in some public streets. And so, you know, this is coming. This had better not come. People love this idea that you can just call this thing and it'll come to you wherever you are and pick you up and take you wherever you want to go, just like Uber, but without a driver. The car just comes to you by itself. And there will be some savings in terms of how much electricity, I mean, how much fossil fuels are being saved and so forth, but it will not allow the system of roads and land use to change at all. And we just can't have that. We can't let these things have access to what will soon be those kind of autonomous lanes in the city, where we already have bus lanes on, you know, go up and look on your way through Midtown and see there are bus lanes driving on their own right away and no other cars are supposed to be in there. Well, we can't let these things have that happen. So this is going to be very tricky because this is what people want. It's private vehicles of this size where they can use a dedicated right of way. So this is the statement: the key to health, happiness, and prosperity is many complete communities with rich amenities, immersed in nature, and linked to many other walkable communities by high quality transit service. It's a mouthful. And all these walkable urban areas require access to nature for human health and happiness. Children, scientists have shown us this, need to be immersed in nature several times every day. They need something to see. They need outdoor classrooms. They need school gardens. They need nature-based schools, and they need schools that are in nature. And I think one great idea is that we need to have carbon gardens that are created and tended by children, trees and so forth, pull stuff out of the sky and put it in the ground, and places for kids to just go crazy with their fantasies in nature. Huge parks are the lungs and the heart of a city. Is the Central Park. All of those people in these massive buildings have access to this, and most of them can walk over there. I mean, it's easy to walk 5 or 6 blocks in Manhattan, right? Everybody does that. So this is probably, maybe in some ways, the best park in the world. This is another view of it that looks to me like it's a little doctored, but you get the point. You know, half of it's wild and half of it's not. This is up on 11th Street in Houston. Have you ever been there? It's very interesting because it's really, most planners will tell you you cannot have just a whole bunch of trees like that in a park because bad guys will hang out there and beat you up if you walk through it. Been there a long time, you know. I don't hear much stories about people getting in trouble, or having bad guys out there. So I don't know about that. But there it is, a forest right in the middle of the city. In Vancouver, they have a lot of these, what they call pocket parks. Sometimes they're only one lot, you know, wide, which is like 5,000 square feet. This one I think is about 2. And people take care of these places. The people in the neighborhood take care of these places. They plant them. They have little garden clubs. These are not, if you do it right, expensive public amenities that require a lot of public money, although obviously some. But they're very small, and they just do the trick, you know, right in your neighborhood. You can go over there when you get home from work, take your glass of wine over there, and just enjoy nature. Beautiful places are, you know, can be built, but you start letting your imagination go. This is in Seattle. This is the Houston Japanese garden. Japanese gardens seem to be the best for sort of meditative purposes. So there's a lot of ancient history going into the design of a Japanese garden that we ought to pay attention to. You need places to sit. Shinrin Yoku, which is the Japanese name for forest bathing, is something to look up. It's something to look up because it's really good for you. Go forest bathing. Another forest bathing place. We need neighborhood meditation parks, places where you can just sit and stare for half an hour or so. And we need children to be mesmerized by nature. They need total immersion. So again, the greatest challenge of this century is to halt the destruction of the natural world. There have been 5 mass extinctions over a long period of time, and each one reduced the amount of diversity in the biosphere. There are less than 10 vaquita porpoises left on Earth, so they won't be around very long unless we're very careful. We get 150 to 200 species of plants, insects, birds, and mammals that go extinct every day. The most threatened by extinction are these critters, amphibians. 41% of the amphibians will become extinct very soon. Mammals, 26% of the mammals, we're mammals, will be extinct soon. So mass extinction, as I said before, eventually includes us. And by the way, if you want to see some really amazing artwork, people go look up the idea of the world without us, or life after humans. I mean, they're amazing pictures. So we need to re-embrace nature. Our lives and many other lives depend on it. So why is nature good for you? I'm going to whip through this so you can look at it later, but they are, helps your memory. You can literally heal by being out there. You can concentrate better. It prompts weight loss. You absorb vitamin D better, reduces your stress, keeps you youthful, strengthens your immune system, and brightens your mood. Why wouldn't you go spend some time in nature? But where do you start? Well, one thing would be to get your hands dirty, and I'm sure all of you are going to do that and already do that often, because gardening is planting things is like the best thing in the world you can do. Take your shoes off. And this was surprised me. I read a book about human rewilding, and the first thing it told me to do was take my shoes off and just walk across the farmland. I did, and I mean, you know, it's amazing to think that I probably hadn't done that for 40 years or something like that. Or take your clothes off. Who knows, you know, but go for it. Think about it. How wild can you be? Because once upon a time, you were completely wild. ancestors were. Grow more plants, surround ourselves with nature. Resist the urge to control nature is the rule. So stop cutting the grass. Stop mowing. So this will happen. You know, if you just stop mowing, the trees eventually will cover all the land, assuming you don't have elephants and so forth, which we'll get to. Think about your yard. I mean, this little house on the left, you know, is just nothing much. It's nice. They got some flowers and so on, but the one on the right is going for it. Urban yards can support wildlife, especially birds and bees, and they can produce lots and lots of fruits and vegetables. So the missing element so far, is a story for the future. And this concept of rewilding that I'm sure all of you have heard of, I've been really into it now for about 6 months. And I'm going to do a presentation to the Washington County Wildlife Society in about a month. And it's just fascinating because it's such an attractive idea that goes all the way from, okay, you can go to places like Yosemite and so on and put wolves in there, and you can start to do all kinds of things at a great scale, but you can also do things in your front yard, and you can ultimately think about doing things to yourself to become a little bit wilder. It can happen at all scales, from global to microbes. The United Nations framework for sustainability has 14 and 15, numbers 14 and 15 are about life below water and life on land, and they are with a goal of saving 30% of land and sea areas all over the world conserved by 2030. The global dream is the Half Earth Project, is E.O. Wilson's big idea, which is protect half the land and half the sea to ensure the long-term health of our planet. There's a global rewilding alliance, both terrestrial and marine, with lots of members, and these members are all kinds of communities and landowners, indigenous people, you know, so it's not like the 17 people in Asia, it's 17 organizations in Asia are part of this rewilding alliance. Rewilding Europe is a big thing, and it's fun to go there because they have a video of it getting wilder that's interesting. And what's going on all the time? And look at all these animals. These are animals that were all over Europe at some point. And so the question is, the ones that are extinct, but do they have relatives that are pretty close, you know, that could survive in the same climate? It's interesting that right in the middle over here, I guess that's France or Germany, there's a human, so it's not, that's an animal too. And so the big struggle is what are you bringing back? You know, what do you want to have come back? I'll explain why it matters in a minute. And in North America, the big movements in North America, although not so much as in England. The United States has this 30 by 30, which is the same as the UN, which is conserve 30% of America's land by 2030. And this is a Biden plan. United Kingdom probably has more rewilding going on than any other place. And the struggle right now is whether to bring the lynx back, which is a wild cat that used to be apparently all over England. And that brings us to this concept of trophic cascade, which is what happens when there's the fly. Certain animals are taken out of the picture, or certain plants are taken out of the picture, and then everything that cascades from that. So in this case, we're saying, okay, on the right, if there's less fruit, well, there are fewer deer and there are fewer tigers, wherever the tigers are. And this is kind of a web that might be closer to us. We do have some big cats around. So if the food flows up and down these arrows from the smallest microbe to the largest predator, you remove the grass, and you'll lose crickets, prairie dogs, and most of the deer. And you lose all the crickets and prairie dogs. and you lose a lot of birds. And so when you lose a lot of deer, that means you'll not have enough food for the big cat. So this guy becomes, the coyote becomes the top predator. And you can see what happens if you take away any other food source. And anywhere in that, you take one animal out of it, and all the things above it disappear. So this is, you look at this later, but this is like this kind of land at the top has all kinds of biodiversity, including all kinds of plant diversity. And you start to take things out, and the land changes. This is just, you might have to study this yourself, but this is a kind of a crude. This is an ecosystem that only has 2 types of plants and 2 types of herbivore, a big, like a mastodon or something, and a deer or something like that. And so you take one of them out, and all of a sudden the dark green stuff that the mastodon was eating all just kind of overwhelms everything, and there becomes less food for the herbivore bee, so there are less of them. You can just see what happens there. So if we're talking about, okay, rewilding, well, what does that mean? How far back do we go? And we all tend to think about when we were kids, so whatever it was like when we were kids, that's the way it should be. But that's not very far back, obviously. So if you're going to go back to rewilding, do you mean what? The Pleistocene, when everything looked like this? Surely you wouldn't have seen these animals so close together all the time, but they were all there. I look at this picture, I'm just astonished. This is land that looks just like our farm, except for the elephants and the bison. But I mean, they would live in a place just like mine. That's the Colombian mammoth, it's called. Not that we didn't have the woolly mammoth in Texas, but we had those guys wandering around. I mean, it could look like that, right? I mean, my land looks just like this, except, as I say, those animals. Interesting little thing. These are, most of you know, this is a Osage orange, a bodark tree, and it's fruit. And it's this stranded little fruit that no one on earth eats anymore. Now, that's what they say. I'm seeing these things get kind of gobbled up by something, and maybe it's just real small stuff, but they get broken up on our land, and then they just gradually disappear. So, but they're not getting spread around. There's no big animals. It used to be they were eaten by the mammoths and ground sloths, and that's it. Nothing else ate them, and they would go walk around and poop somewhere and plant more bodark trees. So you're not seeing growth in bodark trees except when human beings plant them. They're slowly going away. So what do we want? Bigger herbivores? All these kind of animals? I think so. Everybody would like to see us have more of this kind of stuff. And I think people would accept having wild horses and having bison. Why not? And then the kinds of more prehistoric cattle, the kind I mean, there are some we can actually have that would be much wilder. Or do we want bigger carnivores? And the question would have to be why. I mean, I don't think we want lions on our property of any size. And so it's already kind of a problem to have coyotes. So these are the kind of wars that are going on all over the world about what do you bring back. The wildest one we're seeing possible is the lynx. But there are people talking about elephants, and somehow having elephants wandering around the United Kingdom is on the stage. But you gotta be careful, right? I mean, look how big that could be. I mean, elephants can be pretty massive. So we probably don't want the biggest kinds of elephants on our land, do we? Wolves were recently reintroduced to Yellowstone, not recently, maybe 20 years ago. And that has changed everything, because this becomes the top predator in Yellowstone, and that means fewer elk, which turned out to be a kind of a good thing. There were too many elk, and they were killing all these trees and so forth. So it changed everything. Putting these wolves back in there valleys, whole valleys and gorges regenerate. And we're talking about a couple of hundred wolves. We're not talking about thousands and thousands of animals. So willow and aspen and cottonwood increased, and birds and beavers started moving in. The rivers actually changed, and the geography changed, and the edges became a little more, had growth on them, were able to be stable because nothing was trampling them. Fewer elk were trampling them. So the wolves, although very few of them, changed the whole ecosystem. Just to throw this in, the most endangered animal in Texas is Atwater's prairie chicken, which lives fairly near to where we are here, but not far outside of Houston. What are we going to do about that? And then this guy, who's not dangerous at all, but really controversial because people worry about, it's a beaver. People worry about them tearing up land by creating dams and so forth, and you get lakes where you used to have pasture. But how often would that be a good thing? And so the idea of many places to stop flooding for lots of reasons, people are talking about bringing beavers into the countryside. This happening in England somewhere, and there goes a beaver, you know. And I think beavers could be useful on our land. We have a dry creek that runs through it and get floods every year. That could be a series of ponds and so forth. This is a book I encourage you to read. It's called Wilding, and it's by Isabella Tree. And it's about a 3,500 acre massive estate in England that 20 years ago decided to just stop farming and basically stop mowing, and it brought in some unusual animals, and the place has just been transformed. Thousands of new birds and bees and whatever living on it. It's a great book about wilding. We have to connect these wildernesses. So if here's a patch and here's a patch and here's a patch and they can't get to each other, things are not going to work out too well. So we need to make connections. We need to be able to get over this railroad here. So we need to make these connections to bring these places all back together. Wildlife crossings over highways is a pretty big deal now. In fact, we're doing one in Houston. This is the rendering for Memorial Park's idea. And it's interesting to me how what started out in the drawings to be a prairie right here has turned into a place where it's full of humans all the time. I'm not sure how the animals get across there. It's full of humans at night, I suppose. But anyway, there it is. You know, it's a place where now this becomes a complete prairie instead of a half of a prairie. And then the other kind of corridors that we need to think about connecting are riparian corridors, because then animals move through this very stuff we're looking at right here easily. And the water's there. And so the idea that we mow to the edge is not a great idea. Sorry, I'm checking my time here. Yeah, I want to finish up real fast. So we have, animals like bobcats. We see these bobcats on our land all the time. Not all the time, but sometimes. And they go along these riparian corridors. And in fact, nearby, a guy reported he's seen a Mexican jaguar, which used to go up and down all the time. Mill Creek. This is Dallas's largest urban nature park. This will be, this is Trinity River. And this will make Dallas one of America's most nature-oriented cities. I mean, why aren't we doing this? You need to look at this to figure out about riparian corridors. So these animals like this over here that have access to the little creek are always going to keep the edge denuded of plants. And so you got to keep them out of there, and you got to let this stuff grow. A little more about what to put in and where and how. Don't mow. And to think about wilding right up to the edge of the city. This is Houston, actually. This exists. This is, I've forgotten where this is, but get people into the water, get people out in nature. This can happen. This will happen. It does happen in Houston right now. Or here's one in China, a massive river corridor project that maybe is a little silly, but it's fun, right? How do you get people to think fun? So just creating patches of nature where people can just sit and it can do the jobs we want. Landfill recovery is a big deal. Trees is a central park, and we think, well, we can't have things like that. Well, there it is. That's North Boulevard, right in our town. Why can't we have more places like that? Why can't we have trees growing with flowers on them? This is a little excessive. Maybe these are jacaranda trees, but my goodness, aren't they astonishing? More trees everywhere. And again, the park. This is a great idea. Jurassic Garden in London. It's going to be basically full of statues and so forth of Jurassic age creatures and plants and so forth right outside the Museum of Natural Science. And then this is the High Line in New York. If you've ever been there, it's just an amazing, fabulous place, and it's got just mostly nature. Got good big sidewalk in it. That goes through, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 blocks on the west side, right between the buildings. It's an old railroad line. It was just abandoned at some point, and somebody had this brilliant idea. It was brilliant. And this has just been announced, and now there's a little bridge that will be built to connect the High Line to another building. All of a sudden, you can see the potential for having these little things happening everywhere, and a whole new network of people walking around above the street, away from the cars. And New York does, they just do brave things. It's beautiful places in the park that just kind of hard to believe. We're coming along to the point where this is what's called an augmented reality walk in the woods, where I think I don't understand exactly what's going on. I watched this, but this guy isn't actually in the park. It's 3D stuff that's happening with computers, and it looks pretty good. And it's the idea that you can just watch this and feel better in theory, So you get this kind of stuff where people are saying you put on a little headset, you're looking into these goggles, saying you certainly feel when you put on that headset that you're no longer in that room and you're someplace else. I felt more soothed being in the green space. So here's a question about, is there a digital road to health? And, maybe it's bound to help some, you can go online and find things like this, unwind with 20 minutes in nature. And you just watch a little video of the wind blowing. Quickly, we need to change agricultural practices. I can't talk about this, but I would have you look at this. If you're doing permaculture, you have to know this stuff. You have to know what's happening in the soil, because you're not feeding plants, you're feeding animals. And if you feed those animals properly, the plants, they will feed the plants. But microbes, here they are. Get a teaspoonful of this kind of good soil, and it's going to have more creatures in it than all the humans on Earth. And they're spectacular to look at. These are all attached to root systems, and you see the great extender. Most of this white stuff out here is fungus, not roots. And this is how photosynthesis works and so on. Agricultural urbanism, interesting topic. The idea that this development, and I don't know what status is for it, but it's a big farm, and all the land, the houses and so forth that are at the edge of it are pretty urban and dense, like the apartment buildings and so on. And in the middle is products coming out of this farm to feed all these people or whatever. And these people, when they buy one of these places, they're required to put in time on this farm, or they pay a fee to get somebody else to do it for them. This is one by the way, if you want to see a lot of this stuff, go to DPZ, which stands for Dwani Plater Zyberg.com. And in the little search thing, look up agricultural urbanism. And they've got a lot of projects, but this one is really nice. It's like a little English street confronts on a garden that looks like that, and all these buildings over here, this long row, are already built. They are now there, and so you know, they have access to this garden, and it's just you know, fabulous way to live. And no, this is the plan of it. So this long row here, right against the garden, is the row you were seeing. And note that there are no cars in front. Okay, and over here, this whole area here, there's no cars in the fronts of these houses. They all front on this these little parks. The cars are on the back where the garages are, and they're in the back on what I call a car sewer.
15 minutes.
Got it. Looks like that. So forth. That's the people. Some of it's underway. Okay, so you can't. Plowing microbes is bad for the soil. We got to stop doing that kind of stuff. You go out and watch this along I-10 where you're plowing dead earth. Okay, there's that soil is dead. So there's no point in what they're doing there except to put it. It holds up the plant. This is going to be for rice, but it doesn't feed the plant. Got to stop doing that, right? And start doing that. This is cover crops and so forth. So we need a paradigm shift. And I think I'm just going to skip it because I've already said most of it. New story is to live in harmony with nature. That's our new story. You need this kind of stuff. This is my hut where I view nature most days. Just go out and sit there, and that red cup is full of wine, of course, and I have transformed myself by staring at this scene for almost 2 years now. I wish I could do this about consciousness, but we just don't have time, so I'm going to go right past it. But be mindful every minute. Try to be mindful every minute. And almost nobody can do this. I certainly can't, but gotta try. Coronavirus is failure to think about nature and whatever. So, although Leopold said that the situation is hopeless, should not prevent us from doing our best. And he said, we need to create a new kind of people. So that's another topic. So here's our farm. We established a family farm. That was the concept. It's not much of a farm. That is to say, we're not growing oats and corn, you know, whatever. We have some gardens where we practice organic gardening and pull carbon out of the air and store it in the ground. And we're starting to do that. So we want to feed microbes, improve the soil, and grow plants. So this is what it looks like. This little thing in the front here is our house. It goes up a hill and got lots of trees near us, and then up the hill, it's native prairie. That's the house again. Very strange place, 5 stories tall. Can't explain why it's there. Kind of this is a little bit enhanced. I'm sorry to say it, looking out the front window, but still that's what it looked like in the fall. This is our retreat center, which is available for meetings. If anybody has any reason to want to be out on a farm where there's quite a bit of permaculture work that's been done, and you want to have classes or something like that, room looks like this. Fabulous place, I think. But and we do have quite a few animals, gardens, kids. And this was a few years ago, so this is right near the retreat center. Doesn't look like that anymore because I stopped mowing, and that was a big deal to stop mowing. And now it's 2 years of no mowing right here. Tiny little trees are popping up all over the place. We'll see. So animals, we got some animals. Got a 2-acre lake. Here's where it is between Shelby and Industry. That little red line is it. So the water goes that way, and this line here is what's near this blue line is 2,000 crepe myrtles. I can't explain why the guy planted 2,000 crepe myrtles. Looks like that. And then these are swales that we cut to hold water, and this is what they do. The first time it rained, I went up the hill to look at this, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was working because they're level. They go all the way around the mountain. They're the hill. They're level, and this happens. You know, they go down into the earth and make this big balloon that just seeps down for weeks and stays in the soil. And you know, it's a fabulous idea. So this little spot right here is where we're trying to do what started as a tax purpose food plot. Now it's called, I call it a carbon garden. And it did look like this. And these are berms, large berms and swales that the former owner did. He was a permaculture genius. And so that's berms and swales. Okay, so we planted some trees in 2019, and then that kind of looked like that. And then we planted more trees over here in a kind of more formal thing. And let's see, there's a bodhi tree, you know, which is the kind of tree that Buddhists have, and then there's a jacaranda tree down here that I don't know if it will ever get like this, but it's still alive. Looks like that now from the drone. It actually looked like this 2 days ago. Paths are kind of interesting now. So mushroom, this Acres magazine is our Bible. I encourage you, if you want to learn about mushrooms or you want to learn about soil and microbes, this is the magazine, Acres. This book, Teaming with Microbes, is a really good way to start understanding this. And these are Buddhist prayer flags. And what they do is the wind blows the prayers over a series of years out into the land and make everything happen. And, you know, it's been pretty good out here since we put that up. So we're for it. So I would encourage you, spend more time in nature and get out there and feel the air and hear the life and smell what's going on. And it's really astonishing if you're willing to give it some time.